New York City, NBC Studios, Saturday Night Live. November 14, 1987. 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time. The red on-air light was glowing above camera 3 when everything went wrong. 12 million Americans were watching their television screens, expecting to see the normal end credits rolling after another successful episode. Instead, they were about to witness the most shocking moment in live television history. The moment Hulk Hogan's carefully crafted public image crumbled in real time, revealing the man behind the yellow bandana in a way nobody ever expected. The show had gone perfectly. Hulk Hogan, at the absolute peak of Hulkamania, had just finished hosting Saturday Night Live. The crowd was electric. The sketches had killed. America's favorite hero had delivered exactly what everyone wanted: patriotic speeches, wrestling moves, and that signature "what you gonna do, brother" catchphrase that drove millions of kids wild. But now the cameras were supposed to be off. The live broadcast was supposed to be over. The 30 Rock studio should have been cutting to commercial, then to late-night reruns. Instead, due to a catastrophic technical error in the control room, America was still watching, and they were about to see something that would change everything. Hulk was standing backstage, still in his signature red and yellow, thinking he was in private. His wireless microphone pack was still hot, still transmitting to the millions of homes across America. The show's director, a nervous 34-year-old named Marcus Webb, approached him with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "Terry, we need to talk about your contract renewal," Marcus said, using Hulk's real name. Vince called during the show. "There are some complications." What happened next would be replayed on news programs for weeks, analyzed by media experts, dissected by wrestling fans, and remembered by an entire generation as the moment they realized their hero was human. "What kind of complications?" Hulk asked, his voice carrying none of that familiar booming confidence. Instead, there was something vulnerable, almost frightened in his tone. "The steroid investigation. The federal inquiry. Vince thinks it might be safer to distance WWE from you for a while." 12 million people heard Hulk Hogan go completely silent. The pause lasted 14 seconds. An eternity in television. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller, real. "Marcus, can I tell you something? And I mean, really tell you something." "Of course, Terry. I'm terrified." Those two words hit living rooms across America like a thunderbolt. Here was Hulk Hogan, the man who supposedly feared nothing, the American hero who always stood tall against any threat, admitting he was scared. "I wake up every morning and put on this costume and I pretend to be this invincible guy. But I'm not invincible, Marcus. I'm a 34-year-old man from Tampa who's in way over his head. The steroid thing. Jesus, Marcus. I don't know what I'm gonna do." In the control room, chaos was erupting. Engineers were screaming. Producers were panicking. Someone finally realized they were still broadcasting, but it was too late. The damage was done. America had heard everything. "The worst part," Hulk continued, unaware that millions were hanging on every word, "is the kids, man. All these kids who look up to me. What happens when they find out I'm not really a hero? What happens when they realize Hulk Hogan is just Terry Bollea playing dress-up?" His voice cracked on those last words. 12 million people heard Hulk Hogan's voice break. "Terry," Marcus said gently, "you are a hero to those kids. That hasn't changed."
"Has it not?"
"Because I feel like a fraud every single day. You know what I was thinking about during that last sketch? Whether my daughter will still be proud of me when all this comes out, whether she'll understand why Daddy lied to everyone about who he really was." The conversation continued for another 90 seconds before the control room finally managed to cut the feed. But those 90 seconds contained confessions that rocked the entertainment world. Hulk talked about his struggling marriage, his financial fears, his doubts about whether professional wrestling was setting a good example for children. He mentioned specific wrestlers he was worried about, young guys who were making the same mistakes he had made. Most shocking of all, he talked about wanting to quit. Sometimes I think about just walking away from all of it, Marcus. Going back to Florida, opening a surf shop or something. Being nobody special. Just being me. When NBC finally cut to commercial, their phone lines were already ringing. Newspaper reporters were already writing headlines. WWE headquarters was in complete meltdown mode. But something unexpected happened over the next few days. Instead of destroying Hulk Hogan's career, the incident somehow made him more beloved than ever. Fan letters poured in by the thousands. Not angry letters demanding explanations, but supportive letters from children and adults alike. Letters saying they understood. Letters saying they still believed in him. Letters saying that hearing him be honest and vulnerable had actually made them respect him more, not less. One letter, from an 8-year-old girl named Sarah in Michigan, particularly stuck with him. Dear Hulk Hogan, I heard you on TV talking about being scared. I get scared too. My daddy says it's okay to be scared sometimes as long as you're still brave. I think you're still brave. The wrestling media called it the Saturday Night Confession. ESPN did a week-long series analyzing its impact on sports entertainment, but for Hulk himself, it became a turning point. 3 weeks after the incident, he appeared on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show for a planned interview. Carson, being the consummate professional, addressed the situation directly. Terry, the whole country heard you that night. How do you feel about what happened? Hulk looked directly into the camera. Johnny, it was the scariest and the most liberating moment of my life. For years, I've been trying to be this perfect hero. But perfect heroes don't exist. Real heroes are people who get scared, who make mistakes, who struggle with the same things everybody struggles with, but who keep trying to do the right thing anyway. The audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted 4 minutes. From that moment forward, Hulk's public persona evolved. He was still the same entertainer, still the same larger-than-life character, but there was an authenticity to him now that hadn't been there before. He started talking openly about his struggles with maintaining his public image. He became an advocate for honesty in sports entertainment. Years later, when asked about that night on Saturday Night Live, Hulk would say it was the best mistake of his career. That technical error forced me to be real with people, and I discovered that people don't need their heroes to be perfect. They need them to be honest. They need to know that even someone who seems invincible can feel vulnerable sometimes, because that means they can be strong too. The incident also changed how live television handled technical difficulties. New protocols were put in place across all major networks to prevent similar accidents, but many in the industry quietly admitted they wished more public figures had moments like Hulk's moments where the mask comes off and audiences get to see the human being underneath. That 90-second conversation, accidentally broadcast to 12 million people, revealed something profound about heroism, authenticity, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable in front of the world. It showed that sometimes the most powerful thing a hero can do is admit they're just as scared and uncertain as everyone else. And in that admission, Hulk Hogan became more of a hero than he'd ever been while pretending to be invincible. The ripple effects of that night extended far beyond entertainment. Child psychologists began studying the incident, noting how children who heard Hulk's confession seemed to develop healthier relationships with the concept of heroism. Instead of believing in impossible perfection, they learned that strength comes from honesty and perseverance despite fear. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a clinical psychologist who specialized in childhood development, published a paper titled The Hogan Effect, 6 months after the incident. Her research showed that children who had heard the accidental broadcast scored higher on emotional intelligence tests and showed increased willingness to discuss their own fears and anxieties with trusted adults. What Hulk Hogan did that night, inadvertently, was give an entire generation permission to be human. Dr. Morrison wrote, he showed them that their heroes weren't gods, but people, flawed, frightened people who chose to be brave anyway. The wrestling industry itself was forever changed. Other performers began incorporating more authentic elements into their personas. The rigid separation between character and person started to blur in healthier ways. Wrestlers began speaking more openly about the physical and emotional toll of their profession. But perhaps the most profound change was in Hulk himself. Friends and family noticed it immediately. His wife Linda later said in interviews that Terry came home from NBC that night looking lighter than she'd seen him in years. He walked through the door and said, "Well, honey, I just told 12 million people I was terrified," Linda recalled, and then he laughed. Really laughed, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. His daughter Brooke, who was 4 years old at the time, wouldn't understand the full significance until years later. But she would grow up with a father who talked to her about his fears, his mistakes, and his hopes in ways that many celebrity children never experience with their parents. The incident also sparked a national conversation about the pressure society places on public figures to maintain impossible standards of perfection. Editorial writers across the country used Hulk's confession as a jumping-off point to discuss everything from political leadership to sports heroism. Vince McMahon, initially panicked about the potential damage to WWE's family-friendly image, found himself surprised by the overwhelmingly positive response. Instead of distancing the company from Hulk, he leaned into the authenticity angle. WWE programming began featuring more behind-the-scenes content, more honest discussions about the challenges wrestlers faced. That night changed our entire approach to storytelling, McMahon would later admit. We realized audiences were hungry for something real, not just fantasy. The steroid investigation that Marcus had mentioned that night did continue. Hulk faced legal challenges, media scrutiny, and professional setbacks in the months that followed. But he faced them with a different attitude. Instead of trying to maintain a facade of invincibility, he acknowledged his mistakes publicly and worked to make amends. When he testified before Congress about steroid use in professional wrestling, he referenced that night on SNL directly. "I learned something important recently," he told the congressional committee. "I learned that trying to be a perfect hero makes you a liar. Being an honest person makes you a real hero." The technical error that caused the broadcast glitch was eventually traced to a faulty switch in NBC's main control board. The engineer who failed to notice the continued transmission was initially suspended, but later reinstated after the network realized the positive impact the incident had generated. Years later, that same engineer, Robert Chen, would become a documentary filmmaker. His first project was a behind-the-scenes look at live television production titled "When Mistakes Make Magic." The recording of those 90 seconds became one of the most requested clips in NBC's archives. Journalism schools used it to teach students about the difference between public personas and private reality. Communications professors analyzed it as an example of how authenticity creates deeper audience connection than manufactured perfection. But for all the academic analysis and cultural impact, the most important legacy of that night was personal. Hulk Hogan discovered something that many public figures never learn, that audiences don't just want to be entertained, they want to be understood. They want to see themselves reflected in their heroes. Not just the strong parts, but the scared, uncertain parts too. In later interviews, when asked about his career's defining moments, Hulk would always mention November 14, 1987. Not because it was planned or because it showcased his talents, but because it was the night he stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be real. "That technical error was the best thing that ever happened to me," he would say. "It forced me to be honest with America. And America was honest right back. They told me it was okay to be human. That permission changed my life." The entertainment industry as a whole began to shift toward more authentic storytelling in the wake of the incident. Reality television, which was in its infancy in 1987, would later cite the Hulk Hogan confession as one of the early examples of audiences craving unscripted, genuine moments over polished performances. Television executives who had initially viewed the incident as a catastrophic failure began to see it as a masterclass in audience engagement. The overnight ratings for that particular broadcast, once the news broke about what had happened, became some of the highest in SNL history as people tuned in to recorded versions just to hear those 90 seconds of raw honesty. Marketing professionals studied the incident extensively, trying to understand how vulnerability could be leveraged in brand messaging. But their efforts largely failed because they missed the crucial point. Hulk's confession worked precisely because it wasn't calculated. It was genuine fear and uncertainty expressed by someone who thought no one was listening. Other wrestlers noticed the change immediately. Many began incorporating elements of their real personalities into their ring personas. The era of completely fantastical characters began to give way to performers who felt more like real people rather than pure fiction. The psychological impact on Hulk himself continued to evolve over the years. Friends noted that he became more comfortable with silence, more willing to admit when he didn't know something, more open about his struggles with the pressures of fame. His relationship with his children deepened as well. Instead of feeling the need to maintain his heroic persona at home, he could discuss his fears and uncertainties with them. This created a family dynamic that was healthier than many celebrity households, where parents feel compelled to maintain their public image even in private. The financial impact was also significant, though not in the way anyone expected. Rather than losing endorsement deals, Hulk found himself being approached by companies that wanted to associate with his newfound authenticity. Brands began to see value in partnering with someone who could admit mistakes and show vulnerability while still maintaining strength. His autobiography, published 2 years after the incident, became a bestseller largely because readers knew he was capable of genuine honesty. The book's chapters about fear, doubt, and the challenge of living up to impossible expectations resonated with audiences far beyond wrestling fans. When he transitioned to reality television with Hogan Knows Best, producers specifically referenced that 1987 moment as proof that audiences would connect with him as a real person, not just as a character. Today, media scholars still study the incident as an example of how accidental authenticity can create deeper audience connection than any carefully crafted marketing campaign. But perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that heroism doesn't require perfection. Sometimes, the most heroic thing someone can do is admit they're scared, uncertain, and trying their best anyway. That lesson continues to resonate with new generations who discover the story of the night Hulk Hogan accidentally became more human on live television.